So much to do, so little time, and such little money.
You don't have to be poor anymore. Jesus is here.
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, Christianity is stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is curled up in my arms, demanding attention. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cat. Get over it. America will be joining us in a bit, but before we get to that, I need to give a few updates on my current financial situation. As those of you who listened to the last episode will know, I'm again facing eviction due to my being poor. Not long after I posted the last episode, I got a number of donations, not enough to pay my landlord off, but enough to get me closer to being able to do all that. All told, between GoFundMe and PayPal, it's nearly $200, which does help a lot. I am bigly grateful to those of you who've helped me so far. If you're hearing this after you've given money and I haven't personally thanked you yet, my apologies. I will be doing that shortly. All of this stress has made me a bit scatterbrained, and if you've read either Predictably or Irrational or Freakonomics, I don't remember which one talks about it, one of the problems people in my situation have is that their brain essentially runs out of processing power because it's so busy trying to figure out how to deal with the immediate situation that it can't do much else. Handy, of course, when you're worried about getting eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Not so handy when you're trying to sort out something that's going to occur over a longer period of time. Having a cat who seems to think that the best time to demand attention is when you're trying to accomplish something doesn't help either. And somehow, with all this going on, I've got to figure out how to get him flea medicine as he's out and they're starting to bother him again. If I don't get him a dose soon, he'll lick the fur off most of his body. According to the vet, he's allergic to flea bites, so they bother him more than they do other animals. My computer chair also broke on me, so I'm stuck standing at my desk. Not a great hardship, but considering I spend all day at work standing, not exactly comfortable either. I'm going to see if I can fix the thing later today. If not, I'll poke around in the lumber I had left over after I rebuilt the steps and see if I can't manage to cobble something together that will at least allow me to sit down for part of the time. Or maybe I'll get lucky and one of my neighbors will throw out a semi-usable chair here in the near future so I don't have to buy one. I built my desk as a standing desk, so at least I'm not bent over trying to use the computer. But that means I can't just use any of the other chairs around the house that I have to swap out for the one that just broke. Hell, I might just rip apart one of the couches I have, since I rarely ever use them, and make a chair out of the wood in that, now that I think about it. On a happier note, I went to the local Democratic Party's first book club meeting of the year today. The book we're reading is Educating for Action, edited by Jason Del Gandito and Anthony J. Nocella II. I'm about halfway through the book, and there's some useful information in it, but a lot of it is buried in the various authors talking about their pet causes. It's good that they're passionate about a subject, but I'd rather read about how they're working to change things than about the things they're working to change. Still, some useful things did come out of the meeting, and I think I'm starting to make a dent in their understanding of how grave things are. Regardless of if Trump is re-elected in 4 years, there's been some serious damage done to the political system in the U.S., and we're going to have to carefully thread the needle to prevent things from getting worse. I have been invited to speak on a podcasting panel at next month's NanoCon in Nashville. I'll be sharing the stage with Chris from the Podunk Polymath, Joe from Unbuckling the Bible Belt, Jen from Not Another Atheist Podcast, Cass from Everybody's Agnostic, and Bobby C. from No Religion Required. Not sure why they picked me to be on the panel, but I'm certainly not going to complain. I'll have a link in the show notes. I was at last year's NanoCon and had a blast. This year's will be even better despite me being on a panel. If you can't make it, find one in your area and go, because they are a shit ton of fun and give you a massive emotional boost like you wouldn't believe. Okay, that's enough of my blathering. Let's get to the news.
Everybody needs something to believe in, don't they, Reverend?
Bow down thine ear, O Lord, and hear me, for I am poor and needy. Preserve my soul, for I am holy. O thou, my God, save thy servant that trusteth in thee. Save him from this big-mouthed coos with a motor-driven ass who... Forgive me, Lord. I speak not in vain, but this little bitch provokes me so.
Oh, Jesus. At least I can stay in character.
You want to take the first story?
I can totally take the first story. And somebody just sent me this story because I'd heard about it but never saw it. Did you hear about the woman? And I don't know if it's the same woman. I don't know if I just suck. Her name's Rosa Marie Ortega. And she's from Texas, came here as a baby illegally by her mother, but she's been here her whole life. She's 37. And she voted illegally for Trump and has been caught. She's going to do 8 years here and then get deported.
Oh, no, I hadn't heard that.
Okay, I don't know if that's the same woman that... I don't think it's the same woman people were having protests for.
I don't know either.
All right, so first story. Lori Bakker. This story comes from rightwingwatch.org. Lori Bakker, most women marchers were likely abused as children. On his television show yesterday, pro-Trump evangelist Jim Bakker continued to criticize the Women's March on Washington, claiming that the women who participated in the march are broken and unhealthy. I looked at them, he said. I looked close and I looked at them. I looked at them all over. They're hurting. They're broken. They're beaten down. They're not even healthy. So many of them weren't healthy looking, even. They looked like they've been through a war, some of them. I thought I was a horrible speaker. Dear God, Jim Bakker.
Yeah.
I mean, he's right. We are fighting a war. I think we're healthy. It's an emotional toil, obviously.
Yeah. But, I mean, if you look at a photo of any group of Americans, because the majority of Americans are overweight, we're going to look unhealthy regardless of what it is.
Right.
Whatever they're there for. And, I believe the statistics are that most women are abused as children. So, again, in any group of American women you look at least a significant number of them, if not most of them, are going to have been abused as children. So this is hardly... saying that, hardly something that's unique to women protesting Trump. It's going to be women who protest anything.
Right, and it says Bakker's wife and co-host Lori Bakker suspected that the women who marched to get President Trump were survivors of childhood abuse. Most women like that have been molested, they've been abused, they've been whatever in their life. You just have to go back to typically early childhood and things like that. And they just need the healing of the Lord. Well, I am sure there are lots of little children who were being molested in churches by priests who thought they had the healing of the Lord or wished they had the healing of the Lord.
And how many, parents beat their kids to get the devil out of them?
Right. Or beat their children... who was that? Oh my God. That woman beat her child because he wasn't reading the Bible enough. They beat him. She beat her son to death.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's hardly a case of they have the moral high ground in this instance.
And Jim Bakker, who is perhaps the most repugnant human being I know, he and his wife, I can't understand being that kind of a fraud and then coming back to run the game again and people giving you a platform to do so.
Well, yeah.
How do you trust him?
You weren't even born when he got arrested and the whole scandal broke. I was a senior in high school, and I can remember, people saying, "Oh, well, this is just the liberal media going after him because he's a man of God." And they said the same thing when Pat Robertson was running for president. And, I looked at them, and I wasn't, an atheist, but I was really not buying a lot of the Christian bullshit at that point. And I was like, most people are Christian. So, the media isn't going after him because he's a Christian, because most of the media are Christian.
Right.
And they didn't have a response to that, but, but still the evidence is overwhelming that he's a con man, to say the least. Have you seen that video of the chef, the professional chef who prepared the survivalist food bucket meals that Bakker sells?
No, I haven't. No.
It's hysterical because he prepares the meals, and most of them kind of look like what they're supposed to, but not really. And he says, my advice is just starve. He says, if you have to eat this, just starve.
Oh, God.
I
saw the BuzzFeed where they tried to make his like macaroni and cheese or a brownie or something, and they gagged the whole time. I've never laughed so hard.
Yeah, well, no, this guy makes a couple of different meals. Like, one is potato soup. One is like a black bean burger, which that one was kind of okay, but not really. There was other stuff that he tried to make. I forget what all it was. And he also nearly gagged on a meal or two. If I remember, I'll send you the link, because it is hysterically funny.
I'm going to have to watch that. My poor neighbors will hear me cackling later on.
Okay, let's go to the next story, which also comes from rightwingwatch.org. David Barton is organizing a Wall Builders Teachers Conference. A few years ago, while speaking at Ohio Christian University, religious right pseudo-historian David Barton advised an aspiring teacher in the audience on ways to sneak Christian indoctrination into the classroom. English teachers, Barton said, could have students read the works of Shakespeare and then note the supposedly thousands of verses that are referenced in those works, while history teachers could teach students about the founding fathers, like Thomas McKeon, who used to deliver altar calls in the courtroom when he served as a judge. Barton said that teachers can read an altar call in the classroom under the guise of simply teaching what was done in 1779 in Thomas McKeon's courtroom. It's an altar call, but all you're doing is reading history. One has
that is incredibly sneaky, and I hate it.
Well, I can remember I was in, I think 7th grade was when we did world history. And we did a whole chapter, which worked out to be like a month or more in class, of Christians in history, the Christian movement. And of course, it was, just talking about the impact that Christianity had on things like the Roman Empire, etc., etc. And even then, I was like, well, this is kind of a bullshit way to sneak your religion into the classroom. I don't see why we should teach this. Of course, I didn't dare say that because the history teacher was not very fond of me. Something about me asking too many questions on things
Isn't that weird? You would think that as an educator, you would want your students to ask questions.
Yeah.
But that is not always the case.
Yeah. And I also answered too many of them. One time, I raised my hand to answer a question. She just looked at me and snapped, "You don't know everything, Mr. Drake." To which, being a smartass, I replied, "I know I don't know everything. If I knew everything, I wouldn't be here."
How dare she talk to my little Tucker like that? Is this woman dead yet? Because if not, I'll go have a talk with her.
I don't know if she is or not. She used to stand in front of the class and pick her nose.
Oh, ew!
And I don't mean, casually pick at part of it. I mean, she had long fingernails, and she would jam one up in there and start rooting around for, looking for gold.
I am horrified. Horrified. I try and do it covertly in my car, which has really dark tinted windows. Oh my gosh.
But back to Barton here for the moment. What he's doing is he's going to be setting up a wall builders conference next month for teachers. And he's promising to cover everything from America's Christian heritage to apologetics for modern attacks on America and American history, which I have never understood the use of apologetics to describe supporting something. Because it seems to me that if you're having to apologize for it, you're saying, yeah, I know it's a lame explanation, but it's what we got to work with. I would think that the proper term you'd want to use would be like responses or something like that. Something that's more, affirming of your ideas than apologetics.
Right.
But that's just me. Barton and his son intend to inform teachers what it is you as a person of faith can legally do in the school. And since Becky DeVos is now the Secretary of Education, I think he's going to be able to do a hell of a lot more than he could just a few days ago.
I am so horrified about that. And not even because I care about other people's children. I'm being entirely selfish here. I have gone back to get my bachelor's degree. What is that going to do for me, Tucker?
Yeah, well, certain fields, it doesn't matter if somebody subscribes to bullshit or is fed bullshit as part of their degree. I mean, if you're an English major or, something like that, and somebody tells you bullshit about literature, you're not going to fuck things up for anybody else, really.
Right.
But if you're a doctor and somebody bullshits you, gives you bullshit information about, I don't know, evolution, which you absolutely have to know in order to be able to understand things like drug-resistant bacteria, you could get somebody killed.
Right. What's it going to do for students that learned about creationism and then want to be science majors later on? I wonder what Louisiana's education system is going to look like in a decade.
Yeah.
How am I going to... Well, it does mean that when I start to date real young, when I hit my cougar phase, I'm basically just going to get pretty and dumb. So that's fine with me. I kind of like pretty and dumb. That's fine.
Well, I mean, it does have its uses, but at the same time, when you want to have a conversation with somebody, it kind of grinds things to a halt.
Tucker, you don't date anyone 20 years your junior to have a conversation. Or at least I don't.
Well,
although right now I can't really date anyone 20 years my junior.
Yeah, that's illegal.
Very much illegal.
In my case, I just look like a dirty old man, which is what I've always wanted to be, so I'm happy. All right.
snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Asps. Very dangerous. You go first.
Our next story comes from jpost.com. Hebrew University archaeologists find 12th Dead Sea Scrolls cave. After years of fruitless searches for further Dead Sea Scrolls in caves on the cliff near the historic body of water, archaeologists on Wednesday claimed to have evidence of a 12th cave which once held hidden scrolls from the Second Temple period. However, after excavating the ancient hollow located near the sea's northwestern shore, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem researchers concluded that the additional scrolls were looted by Bedouin in the middle of the last century. The archaeologists, including Dr. Oren Gutfield and Ahid Ovadia from the university's Institute of Archaeology, aided by Dr. Randall Price, and students from Liberty University in Virginia, are the first in more than 60 years to have discovered a new scroll cave. The jars in the cave were all broken and their contents removed, and the discovery toward the end of the excavation of a pair of iron pickaxe heads from the 1950s stored within the tunnel for later use proves the cave was looted. Until recently, it was believed that only 11 caves had contained the coveted scrolls.
Now, I emailed this story when I saw it to Dustin Williams from the Atheist Nomads podcast, because he was a seminary student and actually participated on some archaeological digs in that part of the world. So he kind of knows a few things about it. And he, according to him, he says it's interesting, but he's somewhat dubious of it because of the folks from Liberty University being involved. That's Jerry Falwell's college.
Right.
So,
and I don't know how much I don't know how much I trust anyone with a degree or that works for Liberty University.
Yeah.
Yeah, and students from Liberty University, other than studying the Bible, I feel like they don't learn too much at Liberty University.
They probably don't. I put this story in there because, it's interesting. It seems likely that there were more caves, and it would be interesting if this one is, in fact, one of them. If it is, it's unfortunate there weren't any scrolls to be found. But of course, we do have to accept, since it is Liberty University, everything with a grain of salt. Dustin mentioned to me that the digs he was on, they were in places where they were certain they were going to, the ruins were part of some biblical cities. And as they kept digging and digging and digging, the evidence became more and more overwhelming that, no, this had nothing to do with what you thought it was, so you're on a wild goose chase. But there are supposedly an awful lot of black market scrolls from that period of time. So it's possible they could have come from there, or it's possible they could have come from another cave or somewhere else entirely. But still, this, I think, means that there's going to be a lot more people poking around in that area, which, if they're trained professionals, is a good thing. If they're not trained professionals, that's a bad thing.
I don't know how you could... Maybe I just don't know what the head of a pickaxe looks like enough to be able to point out a year. But 1950 isn't... How do you know it was 1950? I mean, that's still really recent.
Yeah, some tools would have dates stamped on them. And, like, if they could read the name of the company that made it, they could do research and say, oh, well, they made this style of pickaxe, in this period of time. Or it could be, something else related to it. I certainly don't think they'd waste their time doing, rigorous scientific testing of it.
Right.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
This comes from Engadget.com. SpaceX plans to launch a rocket every 2 weeks. SpaceX has a bold plan to get through its backlog. The Space Corporation's president, Gwynne Shotwell, told Reuters that SpaceX aims to send a rocket into space every 2 to 3 weeks as soon as its new launch pad in Florida opens next week. As you know, the company put its schedule on hold after a Falcon 9 exploded on its old launch pad at Cape Canaveral last year. Its comeback mission took place just a few weeks ago in mid-January at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is in California. SpaceX's new launch pad is at Kennedy's Space Center, located north of Cape Canaveral, which is still repairing at the moment. The new pad cost the company around $100 million, while the repairs will set it back roughly half that amount. So Elon Musk has just plunked down $150 million without thinking about it. The private space corporation hasn't forgotten that it's in the midst of several design upgrades despite ramping up its launch schedule, though Shotwell said it's still tweaking its rocket engines, many of which are 3D printed, amazingly enough, to improve performance and address safety concerns. It's also designing new turbo pumps and software after NASA government officials expressed their concerns about the current design's tendency to crack. Now, the thing I think that Musk is going for with SpaceX, there's an article, and I've got it linked there, and I'll have it in the show notes. It was written back in the early 90s, called "A Rocket a Day Keeps the High Costs Away." And an engineer figured out basically if you can get to the point where you can fire off a rocket every day, even if it's a disposable rocket, not a reusable one, you can dramatically slash the costs of space missions. And I mean, he gave the numbers, and of course they're in $93, so it'd be different today, but it was enough that the cost of sending a payload into space would drop from, $1,000 or $10,000 a pound like it is now to a few $100s or less. Musk, with planning on reusing the rocket components, could get that cost down even lower if he's able to find enough customers to do launches every day, which he might very well be, because the Planetary Resources Company that he helped found, one of their goals is to start launching all kinds of stuff into space to start mining asteroids.
Which would be so cool.
Yeah. And one of the things I've always had a question about is, okay, you figure out all the tech involved with mining asteroids, right? Getting the minerals out that you want, and you figure out how to get them down onto the surface of the Earth safely.
Right.
How do you recoup your costs for all that expense? Because, there's one asteroid out there that they know of which has more titanium on it than has ever been mined on Earth. So, if you could get the titanium off that asteroid and onto Earth, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to crash the market for titanium. It may have been $1 a pound before, but when you land, well, it's now worthless. And they've actually said, he and the other people who are involved in Planetary Resources have actually said, no, we want to crash the markets, because we crash the markets and then people will use more of this stuff, and that will be better for everybody. In the case of the titanium, since it's stronger than steel and lighter than steel, building things out of steel or out of titanium instead of steel or aluminum or whatever will save weight, saving fuel, which is better for everybody. It'll also stop us from ripping up the planet to mine out various resources. So that's better for everybody. Of course, it will also mean that millions of people are unemployed. So there's that issue, which nobody has yet to address.
Well, I would hope we would create... I guess if you were a miner, you can't suddenly learn aerospace engineering or...
Right.
I don't know, aerospace mining.
Right. And I mean, if you're somebody who's 50 years old, as I soon will be, looking at shifting careers is not really a viable option for you.
Good point.
I mean, because, you can... Certain things you can shift careers in and you'll be okay, but other things, if you're a miner and you're going to shift even to being like an accountant, the starting salary of an accountant, depending on what you're mining and where you're a miner, could actually be lower than what you were making as a miner.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I know some, I don't know what mining wages are, but I know that in certain branches of in machining, I worked for a company for a brief period of time running what's known as a rolling mill, which basically takes pieces of metal, sheet metal, and squeezes them into shapes. So you end up with like L brackets and the shelving racks you see at places like Lowe's and Home Depot.
Okay.
And the guy who worked there, who was ostensibly supposed to be training me but never really did, he showed me his paycheck stub because this was near the end of the year. So he was bragging about how much money he was making. He was making $60,000 a year. That was 10 years ago. Now, I don't think an accountant with a 2 or 4 year degree is going to walk into a job making $60,000 a year here. Some places they would, but of course the cost of living in those places would be higher. But I don't...
Right.
I know where I work. They're certainly not paying their accountant $60,000 a year. They're paying them a bit more than they're paying me, but they're not paying them $60,000 a year. So, but...
Good point.
It's the kind of things you think about sometimes.
So this story comes from TheVerge.com. NASA's Europa report details how it could land a spacecraft on Jupiter's moon. At the end of 2015, Congress gave NASA a big directive. Develop a spacecraft that can land on Jupiter's moon Europa, an icy world that is thought to harbor a saltwater ocean underneath its surface. Because of the likelihood of liquid water on Europa, the moon has become an enticing place of study for researchers and is considered a top candidate in the search for alien life in our solar system. And now, thanks to the will of Congress, NASA has come up with the mission concept for landing on Europa, as well as the top scientific goals of such a project. The main priority? Figuring out if we're alone out there. I think that's cool as shit. I wonder if we're still going to go through with this.
I don't know, but I have to point out that the congressman who's been pushing for this is a Republican.
Yes, from Texas, too. It seemed that such a concept was not ambitious enough for Congress, particularly for one representative, John Kluberson, representative of Texas, who'd been a driving force behind a mission to the moon. That's actually kind of surprising for me.
Yeah.
Wow.
But, I mean...
Congress also told NASA to develop a Europa orbiter and lander, both of which are meant to launch on the space agency's future rocket, the Space Launch System, sometime in the 2020s. So, I mean, they've got to be getting on their ass about it now if we're going to launch within the next decade.
Yeah, because they have to freeze the engineering specs a couple of years before they even start building, let alone launch. That's why the Hubble was put up in orbit with a computer that was 5 years old. Because they had to, they waited as long as they could, and then they had to freeze the design, and then they had to develop a special computer chip that could handle the radiation. And it's going to be even harder with Europa because the radiation on Europa is even greater due to Jupiter. But apparently we can do that because the Juno probe is out there, and it's designed to pass that close. And I think some of the other probes have, well, yeah, they have, because one of them has flown through the plumes from either Europa or, one of them's flown through the plumes of Europa. So it's been that close. So it's definitely within the worst part of Jupiter's radiation. And
wow. I'm a Republican from Texas. That shocks me, and I just sort of assumed all of the Republicans were anti-science. I'm guessing
why do I guess? I have this device that's hooked up to the interwebs. I think I can... I want to see. I bet you his district is for Houston, Texas. I bet you. Yep. He's from Houston.
Oh, okay. That makes
perfect sense. So LBJ's wisdom in spreading out the gravy train that was NASA pays off in this instance.
Wow.
That's why the rocket engine testing facility is in Utah, yet we launch rockets in Florida, and the communication system for while they're, the communication headquarters for while they're in space and their training is all in Houston.
I recently went out with a guy who worked at the facility in Houston, and I was blown away that I was talking to a guy that worked at NASA. You just never think that's going to happen.
One of the folks in TGIA works at NASA in the lounge, the TGIA lounge.
Yeah, that's cool.
Tea Earl Grey hot.
Comes from 3dprintingindustry.com. South Korean researchers from UNIST developed new technique for bone repair with 3D printed cells. New research from UNIST, which is the Ulsan National Institute of Science and Technology, and scientists are treated like rock stars in South Korea, unlike the U.S., has developed an approach using stem cells that, when 3D printed, could help the growth of bones. 3D printing these stem cells with red light absorbing carbon nitride sheets could, in the future, rapidly increase bone growth and regeneration. Let's see here. The research could have significant impact upon the treatment of skeletal injuries, as it drastically reduces the time to regenerate bone tissue. One of the professors, Young Kyo Seo, apologies for butchering your name, also believes the work will have a positive effect on the medical 3D printing industry. The paper, written by 11 UNIST researchers, is published in the January edition of ACS Nano Journal. Medical applications of 3D printing and 3D bioprinting are becoming increasingly prevalent. A recent example is work by scientists at Carlos III University of Madrid, who developed a prototype bioprinter that can 3D print functioning skin cells. And I know, because I've seen it, there's some guys who 3D printed a frog's heart that proceeds to beat.
I've seen it on patches, 3D printed cells that are then put on patches that you can then use for grafts for skin and muscle. I've seen it for hearts, which was kind of cool because the cells then began to beat, and so the patch, you can't see the cells, but the patch would beat.
That's gotta be wicked.
It was amazing because it's just this little surgical mesh, and you can watch it. It was, let's say, 3 centimeters by 3 centimeters cut into a square, and it beats, and it like the edges curl up, and it beat in time to a heartbeat, and it was absolutely amazing to watch. And then there have been some other things that they're doing, and so I love my facility. It's really kind of cool to see all of this stuff, because I didn't know what 3D printing was until like a year and a half ago. Yeah. I'm late to the game on everything when it comes to science and technology. I'm always late for this stuff. But it was amazing to learn about 3D printing, and then learn people in my facility are 3D printing things for, like burn victims and muscle growth, and to repair damaged hearts and neurological tissue. It's so fucking cool.
Yeah, well, you work in the science field and you're behind on science? Shame on you.
I know. All of my investigators are like, America, you gotta get up on this stuff. And I'm like, I'm trying, but I'm still slow.
Do you at least have a subscription to Scientific American?
I do. That is a benefit of work. So, I do.
So, do people make jokes about it being your magazine?
They do, which is fun. And then other people don't get it. And I'm like, my name is really America. That's not just like a nickname for the lab. Or they think that I'm an immigrant and that, I picked an American name. I'm like, no, my name's America, and this is my magazine, The Scientific American. It's written all about me.
She blinded me with science.
Our next story comes from ScienceDaily.com. Scientists develop a lab on a chip that costs 1 cent to make. Researchers at Stanford University School of Medicine have developed a way to produce a cheap and reusable diagnostic lab on a chip with the help of an ordinary inkjet printer. At a production cost of as little as 1 cent per chip, the new technology could usher in a medical diagnostics revolution like the kind brought on by low-cost genome sequencing, said Ron Davis, PhD, professor of biochemistry and of genetics and director of the Stanford Genome Technology Center. A study describing the technology will be published online February 6th in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Davis is the senior author. Yes! Davis is the senior author. The lead author is Rahim. I'm not going to attempt to say this man's name.
Isfandi Yarpour, I believe, would be how it's pronounced. But I could very well be wrong.
And you did better than I thought I was going to. An engineering research associate at the Genome Center. The inexpensive lab-on-a-chip technology has the potential to enhance diagnostic capabilities around the world, especially in developing countries. Due to inferior access to early diagnostics, the survival rate of breast cancer patients is only 40% in low-income nations, half of the rate of such patients in developed nations. Other lethal diseases, such as malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV, also have high incident and bad patient outcomes in developing countries. Better access to cheap diagnostics could help turn this around, especially as most such equipment costs thousands of dollars. Enabling early detection of diseases is one of the greatest opportunities we have for developing effective treatments, Esfandiyapour said. Maybe $1 in the U.S. doesn't count that much, but somewhere in the developing world, it's a lot of money. That would be absolutely incredible. I know that there was something similar created, and I think it maybe only cost $1. And a woman used the method to make shrinky dinks, the bracelets and things. Yeah. So she was able to cut them all out, and then they got heated, and they were made for next to nothing, using an old technology she used as a kid to make fun things, bracelets and charms and stuff. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, well, and this technology isn't just something that could benefit people in the developing world. I mean, can you imagine going to, local drugstore and feeding $1 or $2 in the machine and having it run a simple test for, something that, like, oh, well, do you have the flu or not? And
that would be awesome. So I don't have to spend all day in an emergency room or some urgent care clinic to discover, no, I don't actually have the flu or strep throat.
Right, or any of a number of other things. I mean, because if you could do that, well, even if they just had those in the doctor's waiting room, you do that while you're waiting to see the doc, and they come, when you come in, they say, well, we've already, we've got your test results, and, it looks to be this, or you thought you had the flu, but it's obviously not the flu because all the tests we ran for flu are negative, so we've got to check for other things. I mean, that would speed things up tremendously.
That is so exciting. This would totally revolutionize healthcare.
It could. I just hope it pans out. There was a company that just recently imploded called Theranos.
Okay.
It was started up by a young woman who has all kinds of degrees, so she's not an idiot. Who, they were supposed to be able to do thousands of diagnostic tests from a single drop of blood, and it's turned out to be a fraud. Now, who was the leader of the fraud? Nobody has yet been able to figure out, but basically it's been proven.
Wait. Say that again?
Say what again?
From a single drop of blood, she was getting what?
She was supposedly able to do hundreds or thousands of tests for disease.
Okay.
So,
that sounds too good to be true.
Yeah, it's not impossible because certainly you could do, in a single drop of blood there would be probably a reasonable expectation of, let's say you had a tumor that was, spreading, and there would be tumor cells in the blood, et cetera, but you would have to have a very sensitive detection system to be able to, non-destructively test for, say, lung cancer as well as hepatitis or any other of a number of different things. But the fun part is she was brought down by a company, I don't know if it was Fox News, but it was a publication owned by Rupert Murdoch, who just happened to have a big investment in that company. So when his news organization, whichever one it was the Wall Street Journal that brought her down. So when
oh my gosh, is this the woman that dropped out of Harvard Medical School? I wonder if this is the woman that I was just talking about. So I found the story because, again, I'm always late to the game. I cannot believe I didn't know about this. So the basis for Theranos, the Theranos ludicrous $9 billion valuation, which it appears was achieved without anyone doing any actual due diligence, were the Edison machines, which were touted as revolutionary, not just by Holmes, but by the fawning media and even the Clintons. Theranos had now told regulators that through all Edison test results from 2014 and 2015, effectively confirming that it has no proprietary technology and also validating that its valuation should be zero. Worse, Theranos has told regulators that it used the Edison for 12 types of tests out of more than 200 offered to consumers and stopped using the devices altogether in late 2015. In other words, Theranos' insane valuation was achieved on the basis of doing only 6% of blood tests in-house, all of them erroneously, we now learn, and outsourcing 94% to companies whose products actually worked. Sorry, this is from zerohedge.com. I think this may have been the woman I was just talking about. Wow. How do you release something like this to market and no one actually did the work to make sure this thing was real? Theranos may have put as many as 890,000 lives per year in jeopardy with its fake technology. Oh my gosh.
I'm looking at her Wikipedia page, and it doesn't mention anything like what you described.
Okay.
Because the only thing it says is that would potentially be like that. She filed her first patent on a wearable drug delivery patch in 2003, but I don't think that's right. I think I know who you're talking about. I can't remember her name, but I don't think it's the same woman. But yeah, she pretty much screwed things up. And then, like I said, hysterically, Rupert Murdoch was a big investor in her, and her business plunged because his company, the Wall Street Journal, started poking around and saying, we're not sure about this, and it was a house of cards and fell down around her ears. So, but with this being done at Stanford and not being, somebody who's working for a private company and having a publication about the technology in PNAS, I think it's probably legit. Let's hope so.
Fingers crossed. I would hate to discover, 9 months after this story breaks that it could be also false. I gotta stop being 9 months late on all these things, Tucker. I should probably actually read my subscriptions to Scientific American.
Well, it could be worse. I've known of women who were 9 months late to discovering they were pregnant.
Well, that's... wow. My mom was 7 for both of us. We were 7 months along when she discovered she was having babies.
I've known a few people that, one day they were somewhere and had horrible cramps and went to the ER and they said, "You're in labor." "No, I'm not in labor." "Yeah, you are."
Huh. Stories like that make me never want to have sex again.
Well,
I can't imagine 9 months from now just sort of not feeling well and having gained some weight and then push out a watermelon.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard enough time raising a year-old puppy, which is... It's really difficult being a dog mom, Tucker. Really difficult.
Yeah. What are you having problems with now?
Nothing, actually. He's perfect. It's ridiculous. He's been sitting here listening to us record. Hasn't made a sound. He's perfectly potty trained. He's amazing, Tucker.
That's good. Glad you got a good dog.
I am too. I love him to bits.
Perhaps I shouldn't campaign at all. I'll just, I'll write it right into the White House.
Oh. This comes from the Daily Kos, which I don't necessarily like citing because they're a tad bit biased. But
right.
The headline is interesting because a lot of people besides the Daily Kos were talking about it, and there's reasons to discuss it. Donald Trump has successfully buried the story that worries him most. Even though there are mountains of evidence, even though the implications literally include an existential threat to the United States, even though it is, by any measure, the greatest scandal ever to affect this or any other administration, the story has utterly vanished from the media. According to the consensus assessment of U.S. intelligence agencies, Russian intelligence, under the orders of Vladimir Putin, mounted an extensive operation to influence the 2016 campaign to benefit Donald Trump. This was a widespread, covert campaign that included hacking Democratic targets and publishing swiped emails via WikiLeaks, and it achieved its objectives. That this story is constantly forgotten behind a barrage of daily nonsense is both maddening and astounding. At the very least, we know that Trump's campaign manager worked directly for Russia to subvert the government of Ukraine and was paid millions of dollars to generate spontaneous demonstrations in which U.S. Marines were attacked in order to give Putin an excuse to seize Crimea. And this was known publicly before Trump was elected, though not widely talked about. The Russian ambassador is on record saying that despite numerous denials, Russia was in contact with the Trump campaign on a regular basis. The only item where the Trump campaign forced a change in the Republican platform, the only item, was in modifying a plank to weaken the party's stance on opposing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And Trump representatives said that concern came from Trump personally. And yes, out there is a supposed folio of comprat containing items that Russia feels it can use to put pressure on Trump and his team. But even if every disgusting item in that secret file is just a fantasy, how is it possible that this story has completely disappeared?
I don't know. I was thinking about that the first time I read this headline. There are so many things that Trump has done that suddenly we don't talk about. The big one that happened days before the election was that he was on trial for sexually assaulting a girl when she was 13. And then suddenly she disappeared or dropped the case.
Yeah,
days before the election. And there were people that didn't know about it anyway, but then suddenly she just decided to drop the case. And I was I don't want to be a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but that was way too big of a coincidence. I mean, it was like Friday, the election's on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, she dropped the case because she claimed she'd been getting death threats.
Oh God!
Now, this is one of those things where we don't know the validity of it because it didn't go to trial. And even in trial, we may not have actually known the validity of her claims because, without it going to trial, we don't know what evidence that her side could have presented.
Right.
I mean, certainly there are enough claims that she made that warrant an investigation by the media, even if the courts aren't going to do anything, because she claimed she was captive of this guy who is a convicted sexual predator who happens to also be friends with Donald Trump.
Right.
So, and without knowing the circumstances of her life, we don't know how likely it would have been that she would have encountered him, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't make any assumptions on that. All that being said, to find out that Donald Trump was a child rapist would not surprise me in the least, given his attitude towards women.
Right, me neither. And again, if it was a 13-year-old who we don't know much about her life, to me it sounded like these girls were, I don't know, bought and hired, and she was a child prostitute. And it absolutely wouldn't surprise me if Donald Trump was like, yeah, that's totally okay behavior.
Yeah, I mean,
he was making comments about, is it No, it's not Tiffany. Maybe it's one of the daughters, where he wasn't sure if she was going to get her mom's boobs as an infant. He said this about an infant.
I think it was...
Infants are horrible and they shit themselves. Who cares about boobs?
I think it was Ivanka
Oh, but God.
Anyways, he did say if Ivanka wasn't his daughter, he'd be dating her.
Yes, which is super creepy.
Well, and so is him patting her on the ass and the other things that he does with her on stage.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, because he's not, he's not the kind of guy that you can picture affectionately patting somebody on the butt, regardless of gender, and not think he's wanting to plow that.
Yes, exactly.
So, and I'm going to have to cut things off there for this episode, but I will be putting out another episode later on this week. We've already hit the hour mark, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off, especially since it's kind of late. I've got to go to bed. I don't know exactly when I'll be able to put that other episode out, because I'm supposed to be a guest on the Skeptics Brew Pub podcast tomorrow night. I don't know when that episode will post, but we're going to record tomorrow night. So, in theory, I'll have time from when I get home from work to edit the rest of the podcast and put up the next episode. In reality, I have no idea. So, we'll see what happens. But if I don't get it up tomorrow, it'll go up probably Tuesday or Wednesday. Ouch. Fuss not stop it. And somebody is demanding attention, so. Anyways, with that, I will get out of here. And, oh, by the way, that episode will be kind of longish, because America and I discussed 3 more politics stories that got us going a little bit.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TN Tucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.